Welcome to the TOEFL podcast, episode 14. Hello and welcome back to the TOEFL podcast, the podcast for those studying for the test of English as a foreign language, the IELTS, or for those who just want to improve their English. Today's TOEFL podcast is going to be another lecture. In the previous podcast, we had a lecture about history, and this is going to be a lecture about biology. As you know, on the TOEFL, you are asked to listen to short parts of a lecture and then answer questions about them. So let's get started with a lecture on biology. We'll continue our examination then of the branches of the science of biology. Biologists can specialize and study many different things, but perhaps we should back up a bit and talk more generally about the study of nature in a larger context. The field of botany studies plants, what kind of plants, what their relationship is, and so forth. The field of zoology studies animals, and the discipline of anthropology is concerned with, well, us, human beings. But when we talk about biology, we usually think about the different levels of organization. We begin at the very lowest level, or molecular level, which includes biochemistry and molecular genetics. We then proceed to the cellular level, but not one related to your phone. No, the cellular level refers to the cell as a component of an organism. A developmental biologist studies how that organism grows and changes over time. As we get higher up in complexity and scale, we begin to examine genetics and heredity, how the parent and the child or offspring are related and why. We can even study this notion of genetics in an entire population, what is known as population genetics. So, as you can see, biologists study many different aspects of organisms and attempt to understand how they are related. There are no hard and fast rules about biological development, but our study is guided by certain, shall we say, underlying principles. This includes, for example, the principle of universality, the idea that all living things share certain properties. All of us, regardless of species, are carbon-based life forms. That's one universal, true of all living things that we know of. Another is that organisms pass on some of their characteristics via some genetic material, and that there is a common mechanism for this. Another universal principle is that all organisms are comprised of cells. Well, this TOEFL podcast is more difficult, I think, than our previous ones. So this is a little more of a challenge for you. The lecture begins with the professor introducing the topic. He says, we'll continue our examination then of the branches of the science of biology. So he's talking here about different parts of biology. The expression examination doesn't mean a test here. It can mean that. Examination can mean a test, but an examination can also just mean that you are studying, you are looking at something. So he says we'll continue our examination of the branches of science. A branch, B-R-A-N-C-H, is a word we use for a part of a tree. The arms of the tree, if you will, are the branches. But branch is also used to mean a part of a larger type of study. It's part of something. You can even talk about the branches of government, different parts of the government that do different things. Biologists, the professor says, can specialize and study in many different things. To specialize, S-P-E-C-I-A-L-I-Z-E, to specialize is a verb which means to have a particular or specific interest, and you study that one thing or those very limited number of things, but you study them very well. I specialized in language acquisition at the university when I got my PhD. That was my specialization. I specialized in that area. Well, the professor begins by introducing the general topic of his lecture, and then he says, but perhaps we should back up a bit and talk about the study of nature. The expression to back up a bit, back, B-A-C-K, up a bit, B-I-T, means that we use that expression when we start to talk about something, and then we realize or we think, maybe I need to give more information before I start my topic. We would call this background information. Background. B-A-C-K-G-R-O-U-N-D. Background. And so he says, let's back up a bit. Means let's go backwards and let's talk about some other things before we talk about the main topic. To back up simply means to go physically. If you can back up, means you walk backwards. You can back up your car, move your car in reverse, move it back. Well, he backs up a little to talk about the study of nature in a larger context. A context, C-O-N-T-E-X-T, here means talking about it in a way that gives you information about more things. So the context of something is it's like the background. It's the setting. It's the type of gives you the more general picture of something. The lecture continues by giving definitions of three different types of the study of nature, three different types of study of nature. And these are called fields. The field of botany. A field, F-I-E-L-D, when we use that at the university, it means an area, a topic that you are specifying or specializing in. So the field of botany. Now, don't worry too much about understanding biology in this lecture. It is about biology. But on the TOEFL, you are just supposed to get the main ideas. So there may be some specific things that you don't understand. botany, for example, botany, is the study of plants and how they're related. Another word that's used here is the field of zoology, zoology. A field of zoology studies animals. And finally, there's anthropology, 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 which studies humans. The professor refers to this as the discipline of anthropology. A discipline, discipline, is the same as a field. It's a specific area that you study. The professor then goes on and says that when we talk about biology, we usually talk about different levels of organization, how things are organized, at a high level, at a low level, at a middle level, and so forth. He begins at the very lowest level, what he calls the molecular level of molecules. Molecules are the smallest part of all living things. Well, almost the smallest part. And he talks about how that includes the areas or the disciplines of biochemistry and molecular genetics. It's not important for you to understand what biochemistry is or molecular genetics. He then goes on and says, we then proceed to the cellular level. To proceed, P-R-O-C-E-E-D, means to move on, to continue on. We proceed to the cellular level, the level of the cell. He says, but not one related to your phone. He's making a small joke. We talk about mobile phones as being cellular phones or cell, C-E-L-L, phones. But this is, of course, not related to phones. He says the cellular level refers to the cell, C-E-L-L, as a component of an organism. A component, C-O-M-P-O-N-E-T, is a part of. So you can have a component, for example, of your car, and there are different components in the engine of your car. Well, the cell is a component, a part of the organism or the living thing. Organism is O-R-G-A-N-I-S-M. Finally, he talks about the developmental biologist. Developmental comes from the verb to develop, D-E-V-E-L-O-P-E, which here means to grow or to become older, continue in becoming bigger. All of these are part of development, at least for some living things. And he says the developmental biologist studies changes over time. Two words, over, O-V-E-R, time, means across time, over a long period of time. He mentions then that as we get higher up in complexity and scale, complexity, C-O-M-P-L-E-X-I-T-Y, complexity is how complicated, how difficult something is. When we say something is complex, we mean it is difficult. My computer is very complex. I don't understand everything. Scale, S-C-A-L-E, scale has to do, it's related to size, how big something is. So complexity and scale are how difficult or complicated something is and the size of a particular thing. The professor mentions that as you move up or get higher in complexity and scale, we begin to examine genetics and heredity. Again, those are technical words that you shouldn't worry too much about. Genetics, Genetics, is the study of how your genes, Genes, which is your genes are the things that pass on, that allow you to be who you are, that determine how you look and how your body forms and so forth. How the parent and the child or offspring are related is another part of this area. The offspring, OFFSPRING, all one word, means the same as a child, but we don't talk about animals as having children. We use the word offspring. So a mother can have offspring, a human mother can have a child, but a dog would not have a child. Their little baby we would call an offspring. The professor goes on to say we can even study this notion of genetics in an entire population. This notion, Notion, notion means this idea, this concept. This concept of genetics in an entire population. What is known as population genetics. The expression what is known as means another word for this is population genetics. The final paragraph begins by saying, so as you can see, meaning we've talked about a number of things and now you should be able to understand, as you can understand now, as you can see, biologists study many different aspects. An aspect, ASPECTS, is many different parts of organisms, many different ways of looking at organisms. An aspect of something is one part of it, in terms of one part of the concept